In a town where there lived so many people that the houses were huddled close together, there once lived a boy and a girl. The boy's name was Kai, and the girl's name was Gerda. They were good friends and loved nothing better than to play in the window gardens that leaned from the gables of their houses. No matter what the season, you'd always see those two together, or else you'd hear their laughter. In winter, Kai would run with Gerda to her grandmother's window. "The snowflakes are swarming like white bees," the grandmother would say. "Do the snowflakes have a queen too, like the bees?" Well, no one has ever seen her, but they say that once, long ago, the Snow Queen looked up at her icy palace and felt sad because she was all alone. She had a mirror, which she used to look at the icy things she would make. The mirror was the Queen's only companion. She loved it more than anything else. "I love you," it seemed to whisper to her. But one day, she stared into her mirror and grew angry because she led such a lonely life, and because there was no one there to love her. "You don't love me," she cried in rage. And then down, down it fell, shattering into a million pieces. All her loneliness, sadness, and anger were captured by the millions of shattered fragments of her magic mirror. Some were tiny as grains of sand, and when the winds came, they were scattered everywhere. If one of these ever entered a person's eye, nothing looked right again. But far worse was the fate of those whose hearts were pierced by a sliver of the mirror. They would soon forget the pain and go on as before, never knowing that the heart inside of them had frozen into ice. Ever since then, on snowy nights, the lonely Snow Queen flies through the streets of the town and looks in at the windows. And then they become covered with ice flowers. But why does she do that? Because she is always looking for someone to take back with her, to the land where she rules with magical powers, a lonely land of ice and snow and forgetfulness. "Don't worry, Gerda," said Kai. "If she comes for you, I'll chase her inside and corner her near the stove and until she melts." Late that night, Kai went to the window and looked out. It was snowing softly. Of all the things in the world, Kai thought to himself, sometimes I think I like snow best of all. And as he watched, the snowflakes falling on the window box gradually took the shape of a woman. She was made of glittering ice. Her eyes shone like two stars, yet neither rest nor peace was in them. Kai's eyes grew wide with fear and recognition. It was the Snow Queen. And then suddenly, ice flowers covered the window and she was gone. It snowed throughout the night. And the next day, the town seemed magically transformed. Great snowdrifts muffled the sounds of the wind, and the world was hushed as if waiting for some great event on stage. Then, as if on a signal, People emerged from their homes, and the air was filled with the sounds of the day, and a busy children shouting and laughing. Just as the town clock struck the hour, a big white sled raced by, blowing snow up into the air. Ah! What is it? Asked Gerda.
Something sharp is in my eye, he cried.
Oh, something has pricked my heart.
I think it's gone now, said Kai.
But he was wrong, for one splinter of the Snow Queen's mirror had entered his eye, and another had pierced his heart. Why are you crying? There's nothing the matter with me. Leave me alone, he shouted, and away he went. Now it was the custom in that town for the bigger boys to tie their sleds onto the farmers' carts to travel faster over the hard, packed snow. Kai saw the big white sled circling the square. He wanted to show the older boys how daring he was. Quickly, he tied his little sled onto the big one. "Watch me!" he shouted. Suddenly, the big sled dashed out of the square, faster and faster. Soon the town was far behind them. The snow fell more thickly. Snowflakes swirled around them, and the sled moved like the wind. The snowflakes grew and grew until they looked like great white hens running near them. At last, the big sled stopped. And the driver stood up. She was the Snow Queen. How cold you look. Come closer. Let me warm you. Her kiss was like an icy wound. As he stared into the Snow Queen's face, the longer he looked, the less he knew, and soon all memory of Gerda and her grandmother vanished. They set out again, and now they left the earth and were flying in the air. Above oceans, lakes, and mountains they flew, spurred by the wind. Kai could hear far below the cry of wolves and the cawing of crows. The white moon came out and traveled with them across the sky. Finally, Kai fell asleep at the feet of the Snow Queen. It was a sad, gray winter. As time passed, people in the town began to say that Kai must have drowned in the icy river that ran close to the square where the boys played with their sleds. But Gerda could not believe this. One clear morning in early spring, she put on her new red shoes, quietly left the house, and went down to the river. "Is it true that you have taken Kai? Here are my new red shoes. If only you will give him back to me." But the river carried them back to her, as if to say it had not taken Kai. Gerda thought she hadn't thrown them in far enough, so she climbed into a rowboat that was in the reeds and threw the shoes over the water again. Just then, the current caught the boat, and Gerda found herself floating faster and faster down the river. She was frightened and clung tightly to her little doll. Perhaps it will carry me to where Kai is, she thought. At last, the boat drifted near a cherry orchard. lady came out of a strange little house nearby and caught hold of the boat with her shepherd's crook. "You poor little thing," she said to Gerda. "Tell me who you are and how you have come to be here." "I'm searching for my friend," said Gerda, and she told the old woman everything. "You must not be sad. Your friend will probably pass this way soon. Come inside, and I will give you some of my delicious cherries to eat." The windows were made of colored glass, and a strange light shone in the room. On a table stood a silver bowl full of ripe cherries. As Gerda ate them and stayed with the woman, she thought of Kai less and less. The old woman knew some magic, but she was not evil, and she had always wanted a little girl of her own. That evening, when Gerda had fallen asleep, the woman went into the garden and pointed her shepherd's crook at the rose bushes. At once they sank into the ground and disappeared. She was afraid that if Gerda saw the roses, she would think of Kai and run away. In the morning, the old woman dressed Gerda up just like a little princess in a fine dress and jewelry. Gerda played in the golden sunshine with the flowers and came to know every one. But always something seemed to be missing, and she could not think what it was. Many weeks passed, but one day she noticed the painting of a rose on a broad-brimmed hat the woman often wore, and at once the memory of Kai came rushing in like water through a broken dam. "Oh, I've stayed here much too long," she cried. "I must find Kai." She ran to the end of the garden. Outside, the earth was cold and gray. Gerda held tightly to her doll. A crow came and sat on a branch next to her. It seemed to be saying, "Kai, Kai," as though it knew where he was. Gerda followed it through fields and forests, though there was frost on the ground and her bare feet stung. Suddenly, a pair of strong hands grabbed Gerda.
Well, what have we here?
A real princess.
She's a princess, all right.
Said an old robber woman.
And she's worth a fortune in ransom.
But just as the old robber woman was about to grab poor Gerda, her daughter, who was watching from up in a tree, jumped down on her back and gave her nose a good pinch.
No! She's mine!
Screamed the little robber girl.
I want to play with her! Thank you, Mother!
She was a spoiled and willful child, and so the robbers had to give in. That night, the robber girl took Gerda inside the ruins of an old castle. In one corner was the robber girl's room, filled with birds and animals. Gerda looked at the poor creatures around her. She was frightened, but tried to sound cheerful. "Are all these animals your friends?" she asked.
Yes, they're all mine.
In a corner of the room, she kept wood pigeons in a cage high up in the rafters. She took one of the pigeons and held the frightened bird up to Gerda's face.
kiss it,
she demanded. Gerda kissed the bird lightly on the head, and the pigeon grew calm and cooed softly.
Are you really a princess?
Asked the robber girl. Gerda shook her head and grew even sadder. No, I'm not. And then told the robber girl how she was looking for Kai, and had come to be in the forest wearing such fine jewels.
Oh, what rotten luck, losing your best friend like that.
In the middle of the night, the crow appeared on the windowsill.
Kai! Kai!
Kai! Sang the wood pigeons in reply. We have seen Kai. He sat in the Snow Queen's sled, and she carried him to her land far to the north. You must ask the reindeer where it is. You will know. I know the Snow Queen's kingdom very well, said the reindeer. But your friend must be very lonely and very cold. The robber girl was not sleeping and was struck with wonder at what she heard. She listened quite solemnly, but then jumped out of bed and hugged Gerda. Listen, she whispered, afraid of rousing the other robbers.
I will help you. You shall take the reindeer. He will carry you to your friend.
You'll need these warm clothes and food, said the robber girl. In return, Gerda gave her the doll that had been her companion for so long. No one's ever given me anything, she said. And then she gave the reindeer a mighty slap. And away they went, as fast as they could, farther and farther north, into a deep woods filled with the sound of howling wolves and birds of prey. The reindeer stopped, listening carefully, moving forward cautiously. Suddenly, a pack of wolves descended from behind some rocks. The reindeer bounded forward. Gerda clung for her life. Overhead flew the crow, cawing wildly. Suddenly, the sky was filled with great arcs of color. These were the northern lights, and this was the edge of the Snow Queen's kingdom. The crow, who had followed them there, descended, and as the reindeer watched, the crow changed itself into its real form. There stood the old woman. Old woman, won't you give this little girl a potion to make her strong enough to defeat the Snow Queen? I can give her no more power than she has already. No, my friend. Gerda's power is in her heart. Her goodness and innocence are the only weapons against the Snow Queen. The old woman again changed into a crow and flew off. The reindeer ran a short way over the snowy earth and set her down at the edge of the Snow Queen's gardens. You must go on alone. Suddenly, she saw hundreds of snowflakes, growing larger as they came near. They were the Snow Queen's army on the march. Gerda stopped short. Her breath came fast, forming vapor in the frozen air. As she stood there, determined to let nothing keep her from Kai, her breath shaped itself into a band of angels, armed with shields and spears. They threw their spears at the snow creatures, shattering them into thousands of pieces. There were no more barriers after that, and Gerda was able to walk into the Snow Queen's palace. The palace walls were glittering ice, and the windows and doors were made of wind. Echoing, vast, and cold was the Snow Queen's palace. Yet Gerda had come so far already that she was not afraid. At last, she saw a tiny figure, blue with cold. It was Kai. Gerda rushed at him and threw her arms around his poor, stiff body. She began to cry, and her hot tears melted the ice away. Oh, Gerda, is it really you? They ran through icy rooms and down snow-filled passages until they were at last at the door of the palace. The Snow Queen looked at them, looked at their love for each other, and her own heart melted just a bit. Soon they were walking up the stairs to the grandmother's house. Nothing had changed, but when Kai and Gerda stepped through the doorway, they knew they had grown up. So they sat, grown up, yet in their hearts, children. And it was summer. A beautiful summer day.